Attention everyone, this is your half-hour call to places. This is Half Hour. You're listening to Dynamic Dialogues. Whether you're a long-standing professional in the field, an aspiring stage manager, or simply curious about what happens behind the curtain, you're invited to be a part of this immersive journey as we explore the intricacies of leadership, entertainment, and what it means to be human. Welcome back to Dynamic Dialogues. Today we're discussing blending education and experience, and the debate between gaining formal education versus gaining on-the-job training. Today I have Jay Sheehan with me. He's a stage manager who has worked on a variety of theatrical productions throughout his career. He's worked with the San Diego Symphony and has been a production manager for live concerts and multiple theatrical productions. In addition to his work experience, he's a professor at the San Diego State University and co-author of the Production Manager's Toolkit. Can you just kind of tell us a little bit at first about your background and how you got into stage management a little bit and kind of where that took you in your career, launching from stage management into all the other things you're doing?
Sure, absolutely. Well, nice to see everybody, or nice to hear. I don't see any of you, but nice to have you aboard. So stage management is really, they're the air traffic controller of production, of a theatrical production. And what that means is just think about a busy airport and think about the air traffic controller who's telling them where to park and where to go and when to take off and when to land and when to taxi. That's kind of what a stage manager is. They are the overseer of the rehearsals. They are the right hand or the left hand to the director. They run the rehearsals. They keep accurate reports. They request props, any changes that happen to the script they take care of. And then for production, they're the ones who actually call the light cues and the sound cues and the automation cues and make sure that the actors are going on stage at the right time. We have assistant stage managers that are on the deck, on the stage, one on each side usually, left and right, that are running that particular side of the stage. So it's quite a team. It's a village. It takes a village. And the stage managers are the head of that village. And for me, I think I would say that I got into it when I was in high school. I was told to take a drama class, right? Actually, it was in junior high. I was told to take a drama class, but that doesn't really count too much. I ran some lights in ninth grade. And I thought that was kind of cool. So when I got to high school, it was suggested I take a drama class, and I could not be in front of people. I couldn't act. It petrified me. Social anxiety issues. I just couldn't do it. So they said, well, here's a paintbrush. Go and paint the scenery. And it was there that I think I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I can be in the background, and I can still kind of, do something that I think I want to do. And so I did that for a couple of years. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was kind of running the whole place, right? I was the senior kid, and I was running the lights for the senior dance and all that kind of good stuff. So then I transferred into junior college, and I did really well I got A's in all my theater classes, and I got D's, and if I was lucky, a C in all those other classes. Eventually, I was on academic probation. Eventually, I didn't turn in some homework assignments, and I got booted out of San Diego State. And I thought, well, that's the biggest fail, of my life. But and I was really upset, but it gave me an opportunity to think about, well, now what do I do? Right now, what do I do? And I ended up, some friends of mine were writing a show that was going to go to New York. It was called Suds, the Rockin' 60s musical soap opera. And it was going to open a theater on the corner of 46 and Broadway. And I was like, I want to go to New York with you guys. And I couldn't stage manage because I didn't have my equity card yet. I didn't even know what that meant. So they said, no, you can't be the stage manager. And I said, well, can I come in and make coffee for you? Can I sweep the floor? Can I do anything? And they said, sure. So I did. I went in and did that. I observed the stage manager. They brought me to New York as a follow spot operator. So that was kind of fun. And while I was in New York, I took other jobs. I met somebody that worked at the Old Globe Theater. He gave me an interview because his other half was directing the show that I was working on as a follow spot operator. It's such a small world.
Yep.
So I thought I was going to be a Broadway stage manager. That's what I wanted to do. I went back to the old Globe. I got my union card. I did the interview, and I was the stage manager professionally um, there at the old Globe for the next 5 years, 5.5 years. And when I was growing up in the Valley, I knew about the old Globe Theater, and I'd always wanted to work there. So to get my equity card and to actually work there was just a really, it was a wonderful time in my life. And so I did that for a while, and that was kind of after about 6 years, I was I was kind of getting a little bit bored with sitting behind the tech table or behind the table taking blocking. And there was one season that they had to lay me off because they were bringing in a show from New York. So then somebody from the San Diego Symphony heard that I was available and asked me to come and work as a stage manager for the San Diego Symphony Orchestra. And I said I needed a job, so I knew nothing about classical music at all. And so I took the chance, and I went over there and started stage managing orchestra stuff. So now you can see where all of these, working in a theater and with actors, same skill set as working with musicians and conductors. It's kind of the same. It's a little bit different, of course, but that was kind of my foray into stage management and why I enjoyed it so much.
It's a good example because I feel like the best ways for anyone in any industry to really push yourself into directions in your career and places that you never thought that you would go is to take those kind of big risks and to like if there's something that seems interesting or that maybe is out of your comfort zone. I think that's always a it's always a good thing to do and to at least consider as options. And I think I mean, most people like to stay in their, comfort little bubble and like do the things that they rely on or that they know, are that they can count on.
Safe.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
safe,
it's safe.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've always
Yeah.
been the kind of person that is constantly like moving and traveling and taking risks and doing different gigs because I think it's really important as a stage manager specifically to have a really broad spectrum of knowledge and experience because it helps you every time
Uh-huh.
you're going into something different and new. And instead of just being stuck and pigeonholed in like a one sort of way of doing things, like always being a Broadway stage manager
Yeah.
is great, and that has its certain value. But a Broadway stage manager is going to practice only those skills. And if they're put into a
Yeah.
situation of
Yeah.
managing a corporate event, for example, like that is a totally different beast. And
Totally.
so
Totally.
just
Totally.
because they might be successful as a Broadway stage manager, they aren't going to excel necessarily in other formats if they're not flexing those muscles and taking those risks and trying different things. So I think
Yeah. Absolutely.
it's a good example. If you could summarize what you think stage management is in 3 words, like what 3 words do you think that you would choose?
Oh man. Empathetic communicators of organization.
Okay, awesome. Yeah,
Is
I
it,
think
that's the first thing. First three
yeah,
that
for
came to me.
sure. Yeah, I think those are all three super important and absolutely define what stage management is. Let's transition a little bit into the education versus like experience
Okay.
thing, and give me your point of view on like what you think of people going to school for stage management. Do you think it's valuable? Do you think it's maybe a hindrance to people who are going into the field? What do you have? What's your point of view on that?
Sure. Sure. Well, it depends on what level. To me, what level of school do you want to do, right? So the traditional path, if you want to be a teacher or become a professor, is to get your MFA and go to grad school to be a stage manager. You might learn more theory. You might have more time to get into contracts. You might have more time to, whatever the program is. The problem is sometimes that the program has more students than it has opportunities to actually stage manage. Especially if they're lined up with a professional
Mhm.
theater, they might not have a lot of room. So if you've got 15 students in your MFA program and there are 4 opportunities, like what does everybody else do?
Yeah, right.
And I'm sure that there have been successful models of that. Lisa Porter at UCSD runs an amazing program, and tied in with the La Jolla Playhouse. But she's a very much her book came out, and it's really interesting stage management book. I've not really seen one have that take before. So if you want to teach, maybe, yeah. I never got an MFA, and I'm teaching, so I'm kind of an anomaly, though. If you a BFA in stage management, where you're actually in a program where you have to take 10 classes that are all stage management related to get your degree, okay, it just depends on what those classes are. But again, are you getting experiences to stage manage? If you have one theater and 20 students in your BFA, who's getting the gigs, right? And then how do you assign a stage manager? Like, then it becomes really, really super competitive, I think, amongst the students. There's one slot and I'm going to get it here.
Yeah.
So in my situation at San Diego State, we have one class that I teach that is part of the overall design and technology emphasis, right? So I have students that enroll in a certificate program that I created out of my 4 classes, and they get a certificate after they take the 4, but they're all management related courses. And you can ask, well, Cameron's not on, he's not on we can't hear Cameron's microphone, but Cameron said to me, came up after class, he was a projection designer at first and still is, and is working on our Jason Mraz show, which I'm very excited to have him be a part of. So he said, he came up to me after class, he says, Jay, I want to work on a show. I want to be an assistant stage manager or a stage manager. And that is, boom, let's do it, right? And then you get a show. I have 3 theaters, two and a half theaters, and I have about 12 students. Right now I am looking for assistant stage managers and stage managers. I can't find them fast enough. So I may take somebody who just took my class and put them right into the hot seat, and off you go. I try to make them be assistant stage managers first, and then work their way into it. Sometimes they just go right into stage managing, right? And because the program's small enough, then I can try to mentor as best as I can. Leaf is with us as well. Leaf was in my stage management class last semester. He's a perfect example. He's a performer as well, and he is trying other things. He's trying to do learn as much as he can. So he came up to me and said, "I want to do a show," and boom, he's actually the stage manager of the first show that's going up here in just a couple weeks, called Lucky Me. And so I'm a big believer in doing. There's only so much that I think you can actually learn by the textbook. There's only so much you can learn by me talking to you. But until you get into the seat, and you know this, Brian, until the first happens, how am I going to get out of this? What do I do? You can only have so many nets. You have to figure that kind of stuff out. You have to know what that experience feels like when an actor skips a line, when an actor skips a page, when somebody misses an entrance, if a light cue doesn't work. It's live theater. It's just, and that's what makes it exciting. That's what makes it exciting.
Yeah, I just want to go back a bit and talk a little bit about some of what you mentioned. And you mentioned Lisa Porter's book. Lisa is actually my mentor, and I went to the program that you mentioned at UCSD. I just want to mention the title of the book for the listeners. It's called Stage Management Theory as a Guide to Practice, Cultivating a Creative Approach. And I'll link that in the show notes if anyone's interested in that. Also link your book too. You're an author and authored a book called The Production Manager's Toolkit. I'll also link that in the description for anyone who's interested.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I'm co-author. I just want to make sure that Carrie Gillette gets credit as well. She's my dear friend, so if she heard this, she'd be
absolutely. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So going back to the formal education, you mentioned like equity rule books and like sort of competing and having like not enough opportunities. That's absolutely a good point to bring up. And I feel like if you're working in professional settings and you're trying to get your equity card, or let's say you're on your first production as an equity stage manager, most likely you aren't looking at rules and you're not learning the rules, you might sort of hear people mention different types. So like we're doing a straight six, or we're doing like a 7 out of 8.5, or we're doing a 10 out of 12, or, there's like a lot of terminology and jargon, I think, that is talked while you're working on equity production that is not
Right.
always explained to you or given out, like, oh, well, if you work this many hours, then that's when you have to take a break, or we're doing this change because of this thing that's happening. So, and you sort of have to pick up on that in a very, I don't want to, it's not really sneaky. You can ask questions, but I think there's an expectation that everyone knows what the rules are. And so trying to learn on the job in that particular example could be hard, but you always have the resources of going to the equity site to read on your own. But that is definitely
Right.
something you learn. Also, I think one valuable piece of the education is that you mentioned that, like you don't know what the feeling is until you're in that hot seat. And an educational environment gives you that opportunity to fail at like lower
Yeah.
stakes, that it's not as
Yeah.
big of a deal. It, you know, for the lack of a better term, I think that when you're in a professional setting, if you fuck up, that like it's a much bigger deal than if you're in like a educational environment, because people understand that you're still learning, and they understand that everyone is at, like a learning level, and so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that is a really good, I think, pro for going and pursuing something like stage management or leadership or
Sure.
design or
Sure.
whatever it is, that you can try, you can take big risks, you can really kind of figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and how to communicate with people, try different techniques and things like that.
Sure, sure. The only thing I would say, to say that it isn't as big of a deal. Yes, but no. I think the students that at least in my program really take it very seriously, and if something doesn't go well, it's not like, oh well. They really take it, and they try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So I don't know that the pain is any different, whether you're equity or not. I still think that I understand where you're coming from, totally, totally. And about the equity thing, I think it's about your mentor. Like in my class, we actually talk about unions. We talk about actors equity. I talk about the history. I talk about some of the rules. The big rules. We run our theater department on equity timelines. Basically, as far as tech goes, when we take a break, things like that. So I do think that they get a little bit of exposure. And what my mentor did to me at the Old Globe when I got my card, we had pre-production week, and he gave me the rule book on my first day, and he said, "I want you to read the first 10 pages today," and then he marked out not the stuff that was how many pieces of luggage can you bring
Yeah,
on a
right.
train,
Only the pertinent
kind of
things.
stuff, but yeah, rehearsal rules and performance rules, and how many performances can you do in a 3-day period, and so he marked it out for me, and he said, "You learn those before we get into rehearsal." And he actually talked. He gave me a quiz like before we went into rehearsal. So I do think that it's up to your mentor too, not to just hand you a book and because you open it and you're like, "What's important?" You're like, "Oh my goodness, there's so many rules." So that's what I think about the equity stuff
Yeah.
too. No, I was going to ask you about your program at UCSD. How did it work out for you?
Really, I mean, really good. The main reason before I even applied for grad school, I had worked at an equity house, and they had a year-long internship, and that opened a lot of ideas about, like, oh, well, maybe I'll go to the Goodman, or maybe I'll go to another regional theater like in New York or something, at like the Public or whatever. And I started looking at a lot of different like regional theaters, and I was looking into do like a year-long internship and learn that way. But the main reason I went to the grad school route was because I wanted the connections with the program, and I wanted the mentorship, which I felt like, at least during the process of learning and reading and talking to people that I knew, that seemed to be more of an option through grad school. It might be different, like you said. I think it depends on who you're working with, and you might get lucky that someone
Right, right.
takes more of an interest and is more thoughtful and meticulous about showing you things in an internship. But I'm sure that there are many internships out there where you come and very much just like on the job training. You're learning, and they might be showing you things, but it's not super in depth. And
Right.
so for me, that's why I went the grad school route. But my program, we you're there for 2.5 years. It's basically 3 years, but it's in the quarter system, so it's a 2.5 year program. And the first year, it's really learning the nuts and bolts, going through equity stuff, and learning just like the basics of different types of paperwork, looking at examples, talking to stage managers in the field, and learning like the foundational skills. And while you're doing that, you're like a second ASM. The teams were usually 3 or 4, depending on the size of the production. And usually you work as a second ASM first, like the first 2 quarters, and you move up to your first ASM. And then the next year you start moving into the PSM realm and leading productions. And so we did that, and we worked on a lot of different projects, a lot of new plays. We worked on a lot of dance stuff, and mostly just like straight plays. We didn't really have any opportunities to do musicals, unfortunately. And then in your last year, you do like a it's called it's not really an internship, but it's I think they call it an apprenticeship with you do it with LJP, and you basically are an ASM on one of their productions. And so you get like the professional, like on the job, quote unquote training, but you get a credit for it is essentially.
Oh,
So
cool, cool.
yeah, I mean, for me, it worked out really well, and I was kind of like you. I had my eyes set on like let's do like Broadway, or like I was interested in equity, like the equity side of things. And I actually haven't worked on equity very much since I left. I've worked on a lot
Isn't that
of
something?
things that I never expected to work on. Like I've worked on immersive stuff. I've worked on cruise ships. Now I'm working on
Isn't that
circ.
fun though?
Yeah, it's like
Isn't
it's
that fun?
really interesting to take the background of like a theater equity thing and take those skills and see them translate into other types of work.
And it transfers to a lot. I mean, you can go be an office administrator and your stage management skills would
Hmm.
transfer over. It's amazing how much. But yeah, that idea of we set out sometimes, Brian. We think this is my path. This is what I'm going to do, right? And nothing's going to stop me. And then your phone rings, and suddenly your path finds you, right? It kind of shows up, and you're like, oh, you're presented with a choice now. Oh my
Yep.
goodness, what a good problem to have if you're presented with choices as a stage
Yeah,
manager,
exactly.
especially as a freelancer.
Right.
Trying to piece
Yeah,
together
you're kind of
that
making your path
freelance
as
world.
you go as a freelancer, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and looking ahead. And again, every time my phone, I have my own company now, my own production company, and every time my phone rings, even though I don't know who the caller ID is, I answer the call because you just never know who it is. You never know who it is. And a perfect example of two really freaky things that I'm involved with now, and serendipitous craziness that this journey is for us. Um, I when I start when a guy started, senior vice president, new senior vice president started at SDSU, same last name as me, same first initial. His name is Jerry Sheehan. His email was JJ Sheehan. My email is J Sheehan. I used to get a ton of salespeople sending me emails. I would send them back and say, no, I'm not the guy. After hundreds and hundreds of these, I just started deleting them. And then he got another job. So then I got one more email from a salesperson, and I was going to delete it. And I go, well, I'm going to write her back. And I wrote her back and I said, hey, you have the wrong person. I'm sorry about that. And she writes me back and she says, oh, I see that you teach theater. Well, my son is a filmmaker here and he just graduated. And then she goes, my friend has a show I think you might want to take a look at. And I go, I'm like, oh no, what have I got myself into? And she goes, oh, well, they just played the Kennedy Center and they're going back to the Kennedy Center for Juneteenth. They were invited back. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you do have my attention. And it ends up, it's a wonderful new production called We Move in Color. It's the history of African Americans from pre colonial times through hip hop, told in a very uplifting and optimistic and happy, joyous. It's a dance piece, it's an acting piece, and it's a screen and a projector. There's the production. And so I connected with the producer. I'm saying, well, what can I do for you? And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, maybe we could get you into this Cal State system, and do a few shows here. And I go, send me your tech writer. He goes, we don't have one yet. We're pretty new. We've only done 5 shows. And I said, oh, well, maybe I can help you. And now I've turned into an associate producer. I'm trying to get them tour dates. We're writing grants to come to California, go, do all that stuff. We're going to probably do a date in a residency in Chicago. So my phone, that was answering a really weird email that wasn't supposed to be for
Right.
me. Whoop, here's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Here's
I
an
think
opportunity.
it's good to mention too that like if you're looking for other opportunities that you can also make your own opportunities. A few
Oh
years
yeah.
ago, they were doing a TEDx event in Chula Vista, and I just reached out to them. I had never done something like that before, and I reached out to them like just cold email. And I said, "Hey, are you
Mm-hmm.
guys, you guys are organizing this event. Do you have a stage manager? Do you have anyone who's helping you, organize the event, backstage, anything like that?" And they didn't. And I ended up being the production stage manager for not only that one event, but they also had a kids event. And I managed the whole thing from top to bottom, and I got that really valuable experience. And I mean, I didn't get paid for it, which at the time I was not a problem. Um, but it was really amazing experience because now that's on my resume, and that sort of thing has really propelled my career because people recognize that name whenever they read TEDx, and
Right.
it's a great resume builder, and it was a great opportunity to network with those people and to do an event like that. So I think that you can
Yeah.
also
And how?
you can reach out to people and start conversations about
Absolutely,
how you
man.
can,
Absolutely.
get on someone's team. Like right now, I'm looking to get onto an Olympic team because I working the Olympics is something of a goal of mine that I've been thinking about for a long time. And the Olympics are
Ah,
coming to LA in 2028. So like now I'm
yeah.
starting to reach out to people and try to make connections.
And how are you doing that? Let me ask you. Let me ask you who are you like you have you're actively looking for opportunities. How are you investigating is my question.
Yeah, so there's I know a couple people who work in like the sports. One of my friends in Vegas, she works for the Raiders, and she
Okay.
has some connections. And there's another person I worked with on a project I just finished last year, who has some connections in that realm. And so I'm basically just kind of using the contacts that I know and kind of see where
Sure.
they lead me. And if they don't lead me anywhere, I'm just going to start looking on the Olympic website and like just trying to dig as much as possible and just
Yeah.
follow the breadcrumbs as far as it'll take me.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. I
and
love that.
hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be able to get on a team that is doing open ceremony would be amazing, or smaller
Okay.
events or whatever. But that's kind of, I think that's
What do you want to do at the Olympics?
ultimately I want to work on the opening ceremony and just organizing that event and
Organizing. Okay.
yeah, everything. I mean,
Calling cues? Calling cues for it. Like that kind of thing?
I don't think that I would probably get that position just because I don't have experience and I've never done any sort
Right,
of
right, right.
Olympics. But I think I would probably be like, an ASM or some
Okay.
sort of event management type of role would
Yeah.
be awesome. Because I
Yeah.
know that like that live broadcasting has a different, it's a little bit different animal
Totally,
and
totally.
how they organize things and how they're working with like the live portion of it, and then they're working with the creative
Yeah, there's
directors.
so much more. There's so much more,
Exactly.
Brian, that meets the eye. I finished my seventh Super Bowl, right? I've worked on 7 Super Bowls, and not one of them was a halftime show. Not one.
Wow.
There are, Game Day Fan Plaza, the tailgate party we did for 8,000 people. I managed the entrances. We had these monolithic truss structures that were huge, and inside of them were lights and sound and video that needed to be installed, that needed to be managed. It was there is quite the production. And then managing the metal detectors, making sure that the generators were everywhere. It was yeah. I didn't do one thing with the halftime
Yeah.
show,
There's so
but
many aspects to live events.
there's so many aspects to live events. Yeah, we did the NFL experience too, which is making me think about somebody I want to connect you with because he's probably doing something with the
Yeah.
Olympics. So
That'd be amazing.
yeah, remind me to.
So let's kind of wrap this up,
Okay.
talking about the educational versus the experience, and we talked a lot about the educational part, I think, and what's good and what's bad, but what do you think the um what do you think the other side offers of on the job, like something that the education can't offer?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's that reacting to a situation that you can't get in a classroom. The first time that I had a power outage, what was I going to? How did I react to evacuating people? The first time that I had a major injury on stage, and how did I react? And we actually had to evacuate the audience, for that particular thing, because there was so much blood all over the stage
Hmm.
that we had to mop it up, and that was way before you did anything, right, correctly, and how to,
Yeah.
we got sponges. Yeah, but an actor put a dagger through his leg. So, how do you react to those? An earthquake. I've been at a concert where I had a man have a heart attack 10 minutes before Jimmy Buffett went on stage, and just he dropped dead right there in front of the line.
Yeah, I feel like I deal with a lot of that stuff working on Cirque because we have such dangerous elements in the show. We're constantly doing like trainings and stuff, which I think is the thing we should be doing. But coming from like a theater background, I feel like that is not practiced as much of like what do we do in an
It
emergency?
isn't.
What do we do if a
It
hurricane
isn't.
comes through or earthquake or tornado
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
active shooter or whatever that
Yeah.
is, I feel like
Yeah.
there's a lot of like weather type things that we talk about and fires and things, but how do we respond to an emergency event that might be in front of house or it might be on site somewhere, but that doesn't directly
Yeah.
impact us. So I think those are all really important things to consider
Why
as a
don't you
stage
think,
manager.
Brian? And why don't you think that we do those? What is it that? Because for me, I've been trying to, even as a production manager, I got resistance. Because it's taking up tech
Yeah,
time.
I think it
We're
comes
gonna we're
down.
gonna take up
I
tech time.
think it depends on the length of the production. If it's a resident show, I think it's different than if it's like a regional theater that they're only doing 3 months or something. So I think it
Right.
comes down to budget. I think it comes down to the amount of time, and it might even come down to just like people are only here for 3 months, and so what's the likelihood of something happening? So I think that's my perspective.
You learn the hard way,
Yep, exactly.
and you learn the hard way, and I'll tell you exactly why. If you read the case study in our textbook on the chapter on safety, Kim Fisk wrote it for
Hmm.
us. She's the production stage manager of
Yep,
Hamilton,
I know
and
Kim.
I don't know, yeah, yeah. So they were sat down in San Francisco,
Yeah, for a
and there was
while.
some murmuring. Yeah, yeah, and I'm going into COVID, I think. But I'll make this short. There was some murmuring in the audience. Somebody yelled "gun." Nobody knew why. The people in the front row jumped into the orchestra pit, landed on the instruments. The cast went in every
Oh my
direction.
God.
It's a really interesting story. Um, what it was the murmuring was a man having a heart attack. What the gun was a cop coming in because he thought something was going down. So I think he had. I'm not sure exactly why they said gun, but as soon as that happened, everybody, the panic
Yeah,
ensued.
full
And
chaos.
what came out of that though, the learning outcome was that Kim now is like, okay, if this happens, this is where we meet.
Hmm.
If this happens, this is where we meet,
Exactly.
and we have a plan. We have a plan. So um, sometimes good can come out of that, but again, how do you train for that unless
Yeah, I
something
I actually
happens?
I have a series of articles that I wrote about like responding to emergencies on stage and also like injuries and show stops and things like that.
Oh,
Um,
yeah,
so if anyone's interested in that, you can check that out. But I think the best way to approach something like this is you have to create a SOP or a standard operating procedure of something that
yeah,
is written out that you talk to your team with and you agree on that like, okay, if this thing happens, then this is the course of action that we have to take. This is what everyone's responsible
right,
for. This person calls 911. This person grabs the ERT kit. This person grabs the file of the person who's injured and it has all their blood type and their emergency contact. And you sort of have to lay out the plan ahead of time and you talk about what that
yeah,
is. And you just talk about it and say, okay, these are all the things that we need to consider if something like this happens. And then you have to prepare a scenario for it and you have to kind of pretend that it's happening. And then you
yeah,
sort of walk through step by step with that plan. and then you provide feedback and you talk about, okay, these are the things that didn't
Absolutely.
work, or, oh, we forgot about this
Yeah.
thing that we just didn't think about when we were talking about it. And then you do it like a show condition and you try to make it as real as possible, and you act like it's actually happening. And the more that you do
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
the more when it actually happens, you're like, okay, this is not as scary, but we've done it before. So we understand,
Right.
okay, I got to go here and I got to do this now because we're in a situation. And the more you do it,
Yeah.
the more your body is used to it, the more your mind is used to it. And it doesn't stress you out
We
as
just got to
much.
do it more. And also, with your ASMs on the deck, because they may have an emergency that you don't know about
Yeah.
because you can't see
Yes,
it.
exactly.
And, you have to have a rule, whatever that is. If the ASM says stop or halt or whatever that magic word is, that means that we have an
Hmm.
emergency. That means we have an injury, we have a potential for injury. So halt, whatever that means. If you're running scenery, stop. That's the ultimate
Yeah.
thing. So those kind of things are, they're hard to practice, but they're super. They're very important. I mean, just because we get away, we've got away with it for 3 months. It's not. It's bound to
Yep.
happen. It's bound to
Yeah, I
happen at
think
some point. But
the hardest things to train for and to prepare for are things that happen when the show doesn't have to stop, but something still needs to happen. For
right.
example, like I was working on a pretty large show, and one of the artists got injured backstage. He was like trying to get
Mm,
to a queue, and I think he ran into someone, and
mm,
he was the main character, and we put in his backup like on the fly. But we didn't stop the show because we had plenty of time to get that to accomplish getting his backup in, but he was
yeah.
injured. We had to have PMed or performance medicine. We had to have them, attending to him while the show was still going. And so we didn't stop the show, but we had an emergency happen backstage. And I think
Right. Right.
that's one of the hardest type of scenarios to deal with, is that we
Oh
don't need to
yeah.
stop the
Yeah.
show necessarily because we can take care of it, but we also have to keep the show going. And how do you
You
sort
have
of
to keep
straddle
us.
both of those things at the same time? That's a really hard thing to
Yeah.
prepare for.
Yeah, multitasking at its finest. And just having to split your brain between two
Hmm.
things.
Yeah, exactly.
Calling the cues and listening on one ear of what's
Yep.
happening. Very, very difficult. I don't like to call them lectures. I do a discussion with my students called "Managing Your Out of Control Production," and it's kind of, it's interesting. It's about how quickly you have to assess, breathe, put your own mask on first, take a breath, assess, and then execute something quickly, and how fast the brain has to work. Sometimes in less than 2 seconds. Sometimes that
Yep.
happens. When a real emergency. So I think it's an interesting lecture. We'll have to ask Lee.
Thank you, Jay, so much for coming on and talking about the blending of education and experience. It's been really great to have a conversation about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody's interested, I do mentorship. I actually received the 2022 USITT Award for Outstanding Mentorship in the Nation. If anybody's interested in connecting with me on any of these things, email address is the letter J. Last name is Sheehan, SHEEHAN, at sdsu.edu. And I'd be happy to chat with any of you. So
And I'll put that in the show notes as well with the link to your book and all that sort of stuff. So
thank you, Brian. Thank you for inviting me. I really, you and I have been texting each other. I've been watching your career on LinkedIn and reading your stuff, and I kept, when are you gonna do a podcast? When are you gonna do a podcast? Oh, yeah. And you're like, when the time is right, and all of a sudden it was like a week later.
yeah,
You were right.
exactly.
You were there, man. You were there. So
Yeah, thank
thank
you
you.
for
Appreciate it.
encouraging me and connecting and
No
everything.
problem, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
All right,
bet. You
man. I'll
bet.
talk to you later.
All right. Take care,
All right.
everybody. Bye now.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider checking out the Half Hour blog at itshalfhour.blog, where we have multiple articles around leadership topics, communication tips, and much more. So check it out at itshalfhour.blog. If you'd like to learn more and listen more to this podcast, you can check it out at itshalfhour.blog/dynamic dialogues. We have new episodes every Monday. Click the subscribe button and you'll be notified when they're released.